Thank you, Father Kenneth, for that kind and generous welcome. I'm so honored to be here with all of you this evening to talk about this exciting topic that we're going to be covering.
Okay, I can begin with our first question. What is the best way that you have found, Chief Joseph, to inspire a person to be open to reconciliation?
I've discovered along the way that the most effective way of inspiring a person or people or a group to engage in the discussion and dialogue around reconciliation is to approach it from a very personal level, a very individual level, which means that I begin my talk by pointing out that reconciliation starts from deep within an individual, and that it is from that source in which we seek to inspire him or her or people to the need to respond to the call for reconciliation. One of the things that I always tell people, of course, is that if you are not yourself engaged in uh, reconciliation personally or individually, how can you ever really think that you can then spread it around? You can't give away what you don't have. That's what I'm really trying to say. But more than that, I think that if we inspire individuals to be engaged in reconciliation, knowing that they're going to be beneficiaries as well as others who are reliant upon good grace and care and compassion, that we all benefit, those engaged ourselves, individuals we encounter and attempt to recruit into the movement or cause of reconciliation. So it's really very important to then, therefore, think about adopting reconciliation as a core value, something that we live and breathe, something that we absolutely practice every day. That's as a conscious, subconscious act on our part to seek reconciliation for ourselves, with others, humanity, the world around us, the environment, creation, whatever it is. But it's really important that if we're going to sustain reconciliation, that we make sure that the people who engage are simply not politicians or representatives of other movements, but people who have a heart, mind, soul, and spirit that desires the highest from all of us as human beings. And I think that's where the real importance of personal reconciliation comes about. So often we begin by thinking about racial reconciliation, political reconciliation, rights and title reconciliation, all kinds, all forms, all dimensions of other reconciliation. But if we don't start with ourselves, it's not likely that we can create the big shifts and changes that we require from society to make things equal and just for everyone. So think in those terms. Adopt reconciliation as a core value. Live it every day. Wake up in the morning and pull out your reconciliation back pocket reconciliation action plan, and really have a way to nurture and develop your individual process for advancing reconciliation on your part. So it would start with you, then it would work out to the family, the siblings, the moms and dads, maybe uncles and aunts. And if you think about it, there is not a human being who doesn't require some reconciliation in our lives from time to time. We all suffer loss and grief and harm and brokenness and despair. And those all need responses, deep responses from ourselves. So it's important in the first instance to start growing and developing the art of reconciliation personally, individually, and then work it out through the family, to the community, to the nation, to the universe. However large our effort is at reconciliation, it's really strongly foundational upon our own personal journey and ownership of reconciliation in our lives. So that's where I usually start my discussions. I know a lot of groups get interested in the process of reconciliation through political lens, and they want to go straight to the negotiation of it. Well, reconciliation is more than a negotiation of anything. It's reconciliation is a way in which we educate each other, acknowledge our differences, celebrate them, agree that we all have value and purpose and worth. And when we have those foundational underpinnings of value and purpose and worth, it makes for a stronger bond. A number of years ago, I was at the Vatican with a former national chief here in Canada, and before we met, the evening before we were to go and meet the Holy See, we met and talked about why we were in Rome. Our immediate intent was, of course, to try and seek an apology from the then Pope for the harms that were suffered at residential schools. But as I was sitting there, the thought came to me that it made sense that we were in Rome and we were going to be visiting the Pope, and that he represented a huge chunk of humanity who were Christians and believed in spiritual things. And I thought to myself how appropriate it is that we are here. Because if and whenever we achieve reconciliation in Canada, it really needs to be an agreement in spirit, a covenant that is deeply spiritual, that cannot be easily broken or dismissed or set aside, like political agreements or protocols or treaties and other things. And so I always tell people, of course, that's a really important element of reconciliation, is to be deeply spiritual, so that the covenant we reach is strong and lasting. And that's really important to think about. So it heightens and deepens our commitment to the idea of personally, individually engaging in reconciliation activity and growing out to all of the multiple differences and perspectives that need to be addressed.
My goodness, thank you so much for that was very, very profound. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll start you off with another question then. What is your hope for this healing work of reconciliation? How can we make a new history of a hopeful and better future?
Yeah, it's really important, of course, to reflect on our shared history, a time of the past when there was primarily conflict and tension and difference and oppression, suppression, um, racism and hatred and misunderstanding that come when nations collide, and especially if they come from very different origins and have different perspectives about what is really important. So we need to be able to reflect on our history together. It's always so important. And I've been thinking about the Native American Indians as well. They're in a very similar position to we Indigenous people here in Canada, and they're going to have to find a way and the will to engage with all other Americans. I guess that's the right word, right? To see if they can determine a pathway forward that is more mutual. After all, We're all here together. Nobody's going to go away. Neither will they in your country. And so it behooves us to find a new way forward that is gentle and compassionate and caring and loving and equal and just, and everybody shares in the prosperity, and everybody lives with hope and purpose and value. And when we begin to define those pathways forward, we can begin to have dialogue about them that really creates understanding. And the only thing that brings about transformation in my mind between people is when we create understanding between ourselves, and then transformation actually begins to take place, and we can look to the future once we are able to. I think once again, because I think we've lost our way in acknowledging and recognizing our common humanity, because there are so many political things and other considerations that separate us rather than bringing us together. I think that in a new way forward, as we see these barriers like racism and hatred, etc., we begin to recognize that our destiny uh, it will always be together, and our choice is whether to remain broken in that destiny or create a new destiny that's inclusive, that celebrates diversity. Everybody shares in the wealth and the prosperity. Every child born into that country grows up proud, knowing who they are. First of all, they may be American, but they come from specific backgrounds that they equally should carry forward with them, that allows them to always feel their sense of full worth as a human being. In Canada, that didn't happen. In Canada, we as Indigenous people were taught that we were savage, we're not important, we were less than human. And the way they treated us eventually was absolutely dehumanizing in those residential schools. So most little children, and I was a little child in one of those schools, I spent 11 years there. I left there after that time completely broken. I had no dreams. I had no hope in my life. I didn't know what I could be. I didn't think I could be anything because I knew that I had learned absolutely nothing in my time in the institution that I was in. So I think it's really important as we look to the future together that it's going to be the same place where we've now lived together for a while, and that we Indigenous people aren't going away, and you're not going away. And isn't it better to find a new way forward that is mutual, kinder, gentler, respectful, inclusive, and everybody sharing the wealth, etc.? I think that's the way forward. I know that both our countries, the U.S. and Canada, like to visualize the kind of countries we are as being caring and compassionate, that we look after one another. But we have to be realistic and see the real truth about our relationships, that it's all not rosy, and there are far too many things that are broken and rooted in despair and hopelessness. And we really need to begin those dialogues that will allow us to hear each other, see each other in different ways, be kinder and gentler to each other, making a common commitment to work towards a better future for all of us, for all of our children. And that's why reconciliation as a process is really, really important. I think that in other countries where there are similar circumstances, it would be really useful to look at the Canadian model. I'm sure that there are other models that could be created that might even be better. But the status quo is no longer enough. We really need to look outside the box and see the universe, see life through the lens of reconciliation, so that in every waking thought and breath that we take, it becomes a moral imperative, a core value that we wake up to and live by every day. So, so when we get up and wake up in the morning, we pick up our back pocket reconciliation action plan, for instance. It could be that I'm deciding to say hello to the homeless man this morning. So I walk down the street and he looks up at me and I look at him and we make eye contact. And it's the first time in a long while that anybody has recognized his humanity. That might even save his life, but little acts like that. And there can be big acts, but most of reconciliation, I suspect, happens in moments not expected, in moments where small little measures are as important as the home runs. And it's the only real thing that's important is that we engage and that we adopt reconciliation as a core value.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You are one of the guest speakers for our Global Peace Foundation's Cross Community Reconciliation Project. Actually, we changed the name after you spoke with us, but it became Reconciliation Project in Montana. So remembering that group and that time, what would you say to encourage the Native American leaders in the USA now?
I think what would be really important for the Native American leaders and other leaders in the U.S. Is to simply take a moment to look at the Canadian model. We came from a past that was so broken, so full of despair, so full of division, hatred, and anger, that no one among our ranks, Indigenous ranks, ever believed that there would be such a thing as reconciliation. But when the topic came up about reconciliation, the genesis actually came from survivors of reconciliation, residential schools themselves. We met and we talked in sacred circles all across the country, group after group after group, and we discovered that we had this hidden secret for a very long time about who we once were, what we'd become, and that we're now in a no man's land where nobody cared and we didn't have anywhere to go and we had no sense of value or purpose. That's really important to me, a sense of value and purpose. And I think we got to hold on to that idea that every human being has to have a sense of value and purpose. Otherwise, we give into despair and hopelessness. So I think the leaders, like we did here, we engaged in a process at the front end of reconciliation that was called the 7 National Dialogues. And what we did was meet in 7 places across the country, across Canada, and we wanted to determine what could keep us around the table, because we knew there was so much anger and rage and hatred and division and history that was so destructive. And so the first meeting I went to, it was so acrimonious. People pounded on the table, screamed, shouted, cursed, threatened, and we managed to get through that first meeting, but there were 6 more to go. So we worked across the country, and I noticed as we moved across the country that the tone gradually shifted. It wasn't as dark or angry or divisive anymore. People were starting to listen to each other because we at least stayed long enough at the table to hear each other out, to look each other in the eyeballs, right? That's really important. And we were making a human connection for real for the first time. And as we progressed through those national dialogues, people began to be gentle, compassionate, listening, understanding. And then further down the road, they began to forgive each other, hug, cry together. And I thought to myself as I watched this process unfold, oh my God, that's what it takes, the willingness to engage with each other, have a dialogue that might create some understanding. And it really did change the way we saw each other. For the first time, we began to see each other as human beings from a different experience, some harmed, others not. And that if we were able to talk to each other, we could reach a point in time where we could even identify those harms, the causes for those harms, and want to do something about it. And as we move to the end, we came up with the idea that we've now had 7 national dialogues, and we have a set of overarching principles that would allow us to sit together no matter how heated the discussion, because we're deeply committed to finishing this process, and that whatever we achieved in the overarching set of principles would guide all of the discussions around residential schools thereafter. And that really, really was a miraculous evolution of dialogue, of ideas that allowed residential school survivors and Indigenous leaders, church leaders, and government leaders to be able to stay at the table no matter how challenging some of the moments were going to be. So that was really, really important to have overarching principles by which we could live together and finish the work that was at hand for us. And that was part of the genesis of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. One of the things prior to that was that I was involved with the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, and most of our work was dealt with creating hope, help, and healing. And as a result of those initiatives, we were able to sit together in sacred circles all across the country by the dozens and dozens and hundreds of survivors. And it was there that the survivors began to give expression to the idea that all they ever wanted to do was to tell their stories, and that they did. And so when we were challenged to create a public inquiry that turned into a Truth and Reconciliation Commission effort, we knew that what survivors wanted to do was tell their stories in safe places. And then the light bulb went on. Well, wouldn't a Truth and Reconciliation Commission serve that purpose to some degree? Since we had now given up on the idea that the federal government of Canada would ever give in to a public inquiry. So our whole narrative shifted to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission establishment. And that's how we've been able to. There is a process in the country underway that is reconciliation. And I think I'm going to be speaking to that just in a couple of minutes.
Thank you. My goodness. The model in Canada is so worthy to be studied. You already actually started, I think, answering the last question. You talked about the anger and the rage, and almost that forgiveness is almost a process. So the last question is, what can motivate a person to forgive?
You know what? Actually, there are a whole lot of things. We're always so afraid, and we're always gentle when we approach the question of forgiveness. There's not one pathway, I don't think, that ignites the idea of forgiveness in someone who's been harmed. Sometimes it's a conglomerate of initiatives or words or processes that take place that begin to penetrate my mind, my mind at least. And I'm now thinking about, oh my goodness, if I don't start or begin to relieve myself of the hate and the anger and the despair and the brokenness and the hopelessness in myself, I will forever be enslaved to trauma. I will always be a victim of uncontrollable rage. Because if you don't deal with your trauma and it stays unresolved, you're still going to manifest all of those character traits like anger and hate and rage and violence and addiction that come from it. If you don't first begin to forgive, and forgiveness is not always one home run. It can be a number of little at-bat attempts. And each time you come to the plate and you swing, whether you hit the ball outside of the diamond or out to left field, you learn something. And then every once in a while, there's a home run. It takes a little while for that home run to take part, I think. But those things do happen. Home runs happen. And I think when they happen, we know that we are now dealing with our trauma, for one thing, liberating ourselves from that harm, that impact of trauma, and feeling free to find new ways to express ourselves, whether we want to be kind or gentle or be of service to others, whatever it is that we become. But it's really important that we don't dismiss forgiveness. Forgiveness is in all of us, and sometimes too many of us fight far too hard to entertain it. It only prolongs the vacuum in which we place ourselves in, and we minimize the sense of freedom and happiness and love that comes with forgiving. And forgiving, of course, is a really important step. I could never have become who I am now without coming to the realization that along the way, I need to be dealing with this forgiveness. And sometimes it takes a year, others takes longer. Sometimes in the moment of overwhelming compassion, I suppose, you could forgive, but it comes in different ways for different people. And like everything else, we need to be kind and gentle to ourselves and patient, but we work at it. Forgiveness is just like reconciliation. In my practice of reconciliation, I've always told people that I'm a practitioner. I have no formal education. I'm no expert at it, but everything I've learned along the way, and the things that I've learned from that, I've taken through this process of reconciliation and forgiveness, and said, how do these apply in my life? Because I know that I can never ever reach my full potential unless I learn how to forgive, and I never give up hope. And one of the other things that I want to mention is not in the questions. When we started off Reconciliation Canada, we wanted to know, my daughter Karen and I, she and I were co-founders of Reconciliation Canada. We wanted to know what the other ancient cultures in Vancouver said about reconciliation. We wanted to know whether or not they had words in their languages for reconciliation. We respected, we expected that they did, because it was in the indigenous languages that reconciliation is a moral, spiritual imperative. It absolutely is a highest calling for us to seek reconciliation, not only for ourselves, but with our family and the community, the world around us, the environment, the animal world, the spirit world. It's a high moral, spiritual imperative to promote always the idea of reconciliation. And I think if we ever get to that level, we're all going to be living free, like real freedom, right? And we just need to elevate the discussion around the importance of reconciliation and identify all of those things that will be the result of when we are reconciled. And there are numerous things that will happen when we're reconciled. But the first thing that we do is engage, and we start with ourselves and we build it out, and we engage with institutions and governments and other entities, the churches, and we define together what reconciliation means and what all of our responsibilities are in that. Final comment, in Canada, we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. There are 94 calls to action. What a brilliant move by the commission. And they've gone to educators, to politicians and government structures, to industries and all sectors of society, and written calls to action to those people to promote reconciliation in those spheres. And I think I would really be so happy if the U.S. could do something similar, where everybody starts at the same starting gate, and they all have the same guidance, knowing your shared history together, where you are, where you need to go. And then you have other instruments like the 94 calls to action and the commission report itself, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and just there are so many resources out there, so much expertise out there. Like, we're just waiting for this moment for reconciliation to sort of explode onto the scene. Oh, I lied. I got one more comment, and it's really important. When the commission submitted its report, there were two polls, national polls, subsequent to the release of the commission report. The first poll said that 7 out of 10 Canadians, in spite of the characterization of genocide, wanted to reconcile with Aboriginal people. A year and a half or so later, another national poll was taken, and it said that more than 8 out of 10 Canadians wanted to reconcile, 84% to be exact. So there's a lot of will out there, and we have challenges. The discovery of unmarked graves is a real setback up here in Canada. But I think what we're all doing is we're all willing to stay the course and work beyond all of those challenges, little by little, step by step, and keep moving forward. That's a dream, the hope that we all keep moving forward.